At the Salix Leaf complex, Dorothy had just woken up when she heard the doorbell ringing. When she opened the door, she was stunned to see Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie waiting outside. Paul then explained that the two of them had come over to apologize for offending her the last time they saw her. At first, Dorothy was too shocked to absorb what was happening, so Jeffrey began to impatiently scold her before Paul stepped in to break the tension. Once Dorothy regained her senses, her face was suddenly full of smiles upon noticing all the gifts that they'd brought for her as a peace offering. "Come inside!" Dorothy immediately forgot everything that had previously happened between them. "The two of you came so early in the morning. I'm assuming neither of you has eaten breakfast yet, right?" Dorothy then pointed them over to the sofa in the living room. "You guys can have a seat. I'll go make some coffee for both of you."
"That's okay, Mrs. Jones. There's no need for you to do all that."
Paul Vaughn tried to stop her.
"Nonsense! After all, you've come all the way here just to see me. The least I can do is to make my guests feel welcome."
Dorothy's mouth couldn't contain her laughter as she fumbled around the kitchen to bring out the most expensive coffee and food that she had.
"Anyway, what gifts did you bring for me?"
Dorothy knew that Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie were both deans from the top 10 schools. As such, they were definitely not short of money. Because of this, she expected that the gifts they brought weren't just ordinary and inexpensive items. Seeing Dorothy in such a state, Paul Vaughn and Jeffrey Bowie looked at each other at the same time. It seemed that the information they gathered about her was correct. Kevin's mother-in-law was a person who loved money as much as her life.
"About that, Mrs. Jones, may I ask if Kevin is home?"
Paul asked impatiently.
"That piece of trash hasn't returned for a long time. Why do you care about him? Didn't you come here to see me?"
Dorothy replied without even raising her head. By now, she couldn't take her eyes off the gifts.
"Since Kevin isn't home, we don't want to disturb you. We'll just come back to see you another day."
Paul stood up with a smile.
"When he returns, you must inform us immediately."
Paul Vaughn put his business card on the table.
"Don't worry, Mrs. Jones. We'll reward you handsomely when the time comes." "I can tell that you really know how to apologize to a woman."
Dorothy almost laughed out loud. Then she opened one of the gift boxes and was instantly excited by the gold bracelet inside.
"Oh, this is lovely!"
No matter what Paul Vaughn was saying, she was too distracted to listen. Jeffrey Bowie took advantage of the opportunity and quickly attached a tiny listening device under the coffee table. The Tanner brothers threw 5 or 6 people off of the rooftop of Corwin Tower, causing them to instantly fall to their deaths. Kevin's face darkened as he stepped on a man's chest and asked, "Did you see what just happened to them? I'll give you one last chance to save yourself. Tell me who sent you here." About 10 minutes earlier, they found the weak point of the semi-invisible barrier. Then they traced the trail of the green snake poison to see where it was coming from and discovered 7 assassins in a hiding place. They were subsequently beaten up then by the Tanner brothers and taken up to the rooftop of Corwin Tower for questioning. "Don't try my patience," Kevin said callously. "Otherwise you'll die a horrible death like your fellow assassins." The man's lips moved slightly. When Brett Stewart saw this, he quickly reached out with his hand and grabbed the man's jaw. Then he pulled out a green tooth from the man's mouth.
"Planning to poison yourself, were you? You won't get off that easily."
Brett tossed the poisonous tooth over his shoulder. "Speak up," Kevin growled as he exerted a little more force on the man's chest. The man seemed to be unable to withstand Kevin's strength and spat out a mouthful of blood.
"Kevin, don't bother. There's no need for you to do anything to him."
Brett shook his head and sighed. "What do you mean?" Kevin asked in confusion.
"This group of men has been trained to sacrifice themselves for their leader. You can tell from their ability to conceal poison. If they fail their mission, they must swiftly end their own lives. That means that this man is already prepared to die at all costs.
so you won't be able to get anything out of him," Brett acknowledged with regret. "However, it seems that whoever is behind this really wants us to die." Kevin stomped on the man's chest forcefully. The pressure was so great that the man's chest caved in, rendering him unconscious. "Kevin, I plan to stay in Chicago for a while. We'll meet again soon." Brett patted Kevin's shoulder and added, "Also, the Pinnacle will inevitably come back here sooner or later, so we have to prepare ourselves accordingly." After saying this, Brett's steward quickly left. As Kevin thought about what Brett had said, his heart was filled with mixed feelings. Things were becoming a mess, and the whole situation was even more complicated than he'd ever imagined. The Alliance had already rebelled against the Great Powers to join forces with the Pinnacle. On the other hand, the Myriads had temporarily abandoned their headquarters and already mobilized their forces across Chicago and Detroit to defend the city as part of the Foundation advance team. At the same time, the top 10 schools had also gathered their forces in Chicago for the upcoming war. Under the calm surface of the waters, undercurrents had started to surge, and in just a few days, an all-out war between the forces of good and evil was set to begin. Where did this leave Kevin? He had to carefully consider his next move. "Seems like I have a lot of planning to do," Kevin sighed deeply and thought to himself. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was Miss Wilson calling. When Kevin accepted the call, Miss Wilson was the first to speak. "President Williams, Gwen Archer is looking for you here. She's currently in your office." "Okay, I got it. Tell her that she doesn't need to wait for me at the Williams Company. Tonight we'll meet at 10 o'clock in the Salix Leaf Hotel." Kevin hung up the phone and put it back in his pocket. He narrowed his eyes as he looked at the scenery in the distance. His face gradually became more and more serious. In the Huxley family's mansion in St. Louis, Spencer suddenly kicked the door open and walked in aggressively with a group of men. Although the Huxley family's guards had some combat training, they were used to living a comfortable life in the mansion. So even if they did try to fight back, how could they be a match for the experts from the Radiance?
"Who are you?"
Virgil Huxley shouted under the support of several guards and family members.
"How dare you trespass into my family's mansion without permission?"
"You really are quite arrogant. You must be Virgil Huxley, the current patriarch of the Huxley family, right?" Spencer waved the cold blade in his hand and took a few steps forward.
"And who the hell are you?"
Virgil's chest heaved up and down violently. His face was as gloomy as the weather before a storm. At the moment, he wasn't the only one who was angry. The rest of the members of the Huxley family were also furious. After all, their family had dominated St. Louis for so many years. When had they ever suffered this kind of injustice? Now that someone had rudely barged in through their door in broad daylight, how would the Huxley family continue to maintain their foothold in St. Louis in the future if news of this got out?
"It doesn't matter who we are. The main purpose of our visit today is to seek justice from the Huxley family's patriarch. I wonder if you still remember the matter of sending some men to Chicago?"
Spencer asked angrily. Virgil Huxley's facial expression changed completely when he heard this. In an instant, his face turned pale. He was the only one who knew about this matter in the Huxley family. So how did these people find out?
"Could it be that someone leaked the information?"
Virgil thought with uncertainty in his heart.
"Do you remember now, Mr. Huxley? Don't tell me you forgot about the matter because you've already done this to so many people."
The murderous intent in Spencer's body became stronger along with his words. The violent aura that his body was emitting was enough to make all the people of the Huxley family tremble in fear.
You're just slandering me. I have no idea what you're talking about."
Virgil Huxley was trembling slightly as well. However, after so many years of experience dealing with enemies in the business world, he was able to hide his emotions relatively well. Although his power base wasn't as high as Spencer's, he still considered himself to be a master in scheming and manipulation.
"You really don't know, or are you just playing dumb?"
Spencer sniffed and said.
"Regardless of whether you admit it or not, your family will pay for what you've done, and they'll pay with their blood."
After that, Spencer didn't want to waste any more time with him. He turned his wrist slightly, and a piercing cold light burst out from his blade. When they saw this, the members of the Radiants who were standing behind him understood what he meant, and they all rushed forward. In an undisclosed location, there were dozens of structures that had been built near a huge waterfall that flowed down from the top of a mountain. This place was the Union's headquarters. Halfway up the mountain, Renee Silver stood with her hands behind her back. As she looked out at the beautiful scenery, her eyes were filled with complex emotions that couldn't be described with words.
"Why are you so anxious and restless? What are you worried about?"
Vivian Myers slowly walked over from a distance.
"Are you still thinking about the Williams family?"
"Enchantress, you might not know this, but before he passed away, I promised Randall Williams that I would fulfill his dying wish and kill that thief Kevin for him. But now," Renee Silver let out a long sigh. Kevin's power base kept exponentially increasing with every encounter, and he'd even established a connection with the Radiants. Because of that, it was definitely easier said than done for Renee Silver to deal with him. In her heart, this small favor eventually turned into a huge problem, and it would only get bigger and more impossible if she didn't find a way to get rid of him soon. Vivian glanced at her and asked, "Do you really want to take Kevin's life?" At the Union's headquarters, Renee Silver had a restless and complicated look in her eyes. Seeing this, Vivian Myers asked whether she was still thinking about the Williams family, and Renee sighed. Then she shared with Vivian that Randall Williams' dying wish was for her to kill Kevin Williams, which was a small favor that had turned into a huge problem for her given his increasing strength. In light of this, Vivian asked her if she really wanted to take Kevin's life. Renee Silver was stunned for a moment before she quickly came back to her senses and gave Vivian Myers a puzzled look. Although they were both from the Union, the two of them had very different responsibilities. As the Union's director, Renee Silver was in charge of managing the organization's day-to-day affairs and was based in the city more often. On the other hand, as the Union's enchantress, Vivian Myers helped to oversee the organization's overall plans and was usually based at the headquarters. Still, Vivian Myers had also been the Union's director for many years in the past. Because of that, her experience and seniority over Renee Silver were also reflected in the difference in their power base. After seriously mulling over the question for a while, Renee Silver nodded heavily and clenched her fists tightly together. "Randall Williams was a dear friend of mine. Since I already promised him that I would kill Kevin for him, I must keep my word and dedicate the rest of my life to fulfilling his dying wish." After hearing her answer, Vivian Myers suddenly sighed and shook her head. There was a strong sense of pity in her eyes. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you do this. Instead, you have to cut your ties with the Williams family." Vivian Myers spoke emotionally, but her expression didn't change much. Renee immediately became anxious and quickly asked, "Why?" "I don't need to give you a reason. This was a direct order given by the Grand Empress after she came out of seclusion and found out about your activities in Chicago and New York." Vivian replied in a flat tone. "The Grand Empress really said that?" Renee was completely stunned and felt extremely shocked to hear this. The Grand Empress of the Union was a distinguished figure whose reputation within the great powers could be compared with that of Wayne Ford. An extremely mysterious figure, very few people within the organization had actually seen her with their own eyes. And even after staying in the Union for so many years, even Renee Silver had only seen her 3 times. And since the Grand Empress was usually in seclusion, she hadn't asked or interfered with the matters of the organization for many years. Renee was very nervous as she asked, "Does the Grand Empress know about Kevin?" "I don't know, but since the Grand Empress said that you can't lay a finger on him, you must abide by her order. Otherwise, if you resist, you'll be expelled not just from your position as director, but from the Union altogether." Vivian's expression gradually became serious. "I can't believe this. This is unacceptable." Renee shook her head boldly in defiance. "It can't be like this. Kevin is such a despicable scum. Why does he deserve to be spared and favored by the Grand Empress? Is it because he's in possession of the Power Pills formula?" The Grand Empress's thoughts cannot be rashly guessed. She only told me that it wasn't easy for the Union to achieve its status today, taking generations' worth of hard work from our predecessors. And if you act impulsively, you could destroy the entire foundation that the Union was built upon. Vivian spoke in a solemn tone. "If you know what's best for you, I advise you to stand down and put the Union's interests above your own." Vivian Meyer's words were like a sudden clap of thunder in the clear blue sky that rang in Renee Silver's ears, followed by a bolt of lightning that struck her right in the heart. Back in Corwin Tower, the Tanner brothers were already asleep after carrying out the exhausting task of destroying the semi-invisible barrier and making sure that all traces of the green snake poison had dispersed out of the building. Just then, the elusive Night King once again appeared and went to find Kevin. As the two of them sat on the sofa in the main hall and looked at each other, the atmosphere was somewhat heavy. Kevin pointed at Elijah Tanner and the others, who were sleeping soundly, and asked, "What are you doing here, Night King? They might wake up if they hear you." "I should ask you the same question. Do you know what you're doing?" The Night King's expression was extremely serious. His tone of voice was filled with anger. "Me?" Kevin was puzzled. "Did I do something wrong?" "Do you think you're so powerful now that you don't need my guidance anymore? How dare you mess around with the Herbalist Society and the Morris family? On top of that, how could you agree to join the Reaper Squad without my permission?" The Night King was very familiar with Kevin's activities and recalled everything that had happened to him since their last encounter. "Have you been spying on me?" Kevin was so shocked that he didn't know what to say. "Kevin, if it wasn't for me, you would have been long dead by now. Don't you remember how many times I've saved your life?" The Night King scolded with a stern voice. "That being said, you better listen to me. Pull all of your forces out of St. Louis immediately. Don't turn your focus away from the center of gravity. If you want to increase your strength and that of the Radiants, do it in Chicago." Kevin was speechless when he heard this. His lips started to move, but he didn't say a word. At that moment, his heart was filled with a doubt. While Chicago was the bigger city in terms of size and population, the opportunities for him there versus St. Louis were like comparing a small lake to a vast ocean. Moreover, why did the Night King say that Chicago was the center of gravity? Even if he managed to take over Chicago and have the entire city under his control, how long would it last? Once the Pinnacle broke through the continent and launched an attack there, all of his hard work could be wiped out in an instant. Kevin braced himself and asked, "Why do I have to do this? I need an answer." "What right do you have to question your mentor? The things I've given to you, as well as to your family and friends, have made all of your lives better so far. Isn't that enough? Anyway, your current power base still isn't enough, so you only have 2 choices right now.
Either you do as I say or you don't."
The anger in the Night King's tone became more and more obvious. There was a possibility that he would lash out at any moment. However, it was because of what he said about his strength that Kevin began to have even more doubts. Because of this, he urgently wanted to find out everything that the Night King was hiding from him. Was his current power base really that low? Kevin was very confident that if he unleashed his full strength, Paul Vaughn and the other leaders of the top 10 schools wouldn't be able to defeat him, even if they all attacked him together. "What if I refuse to do as you say?" Kevin asked hesitantly.
"Then I'll break your legs and take away all your strength. After that, I'll destroy the Radiants and annihilate the Swinton family,"
the Night King said with a straight face, as if he was casually talking about some simple matter.
"Never get involved in any fight that you can't handle. You may be my student, Kevin, but don't you dare test my patience. You don't want to feel my wrath."
"I can promise you that I won't participate in the affairs down in St. Louis for now. However, I won't withdraw the Radiance from there." Kevin tried to bargain as he fought for his last glimmer of hope to keep a foundation in St. Louis. After all, it hadn't been easy for him to get things in St. Louis to the state that they were in today. Consequently, he definitely couldn't give up everything that he'd worked hard for just like that.
"This can be allowed, but you must prioritize protecting Chicago against the Pinnacle. Make sure that the Radiance gains a firm foothold here in the shortest time possible. Remember, you don't have much time left,"
the Night King said sternly once again. In the KWTD Corporation Chicago branch, Lily was sitting inside an office. She kept double-checking all the documents in front of her, afraid that there would be some errors that she had overlooked. Today, she was representing the Blue Water Export Company in hopes of securing the winning bid for the KWTD Corporation's upcoming project and getting their representatives to sign the contract. The amount of money involved in the project was quite large, so the Blue Water Export Company's success was riding on Lily. For that reason, she couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Otherwise, if she failed, she wouldn't be able to face her bosses and coworkers. At 11 o'clock sharp, the office door was pushed open as Tyler Dawn walked in quickly with two other people. As soon as they entered, the 5 people who had come to represent the Blue Water Export Company, along with Lily, all stood up almost immediately. They weren't expecting that the potential partnership would make the man at the top of the company ladder, Tyler Dawn, show up in person.
"I'm sorry I made my sister-in-law wait for such a long time. It's all my secretary's fault for informing me late that you were coming here. But don't worry, it won't happen again in the future because I've already fired her."
Tyler Dawn laughed as he walked up to Lily and enthusiastically shook hands with her.
"Sister-in-law?"
The way he addressed her shocked his two colleagues from the KWTD Corporation. They would never have thought that the person they were meeting had such a close relationship with him. "Sister-in-law? Mr. Dawn? Could I have misheard you? Perhaps you've mistaken me for someone else," Lily stammered as she tried to react. Although they'd already met twice before in the Jones family's mansion, she couldn't think of any other connection between them at all.
"Sister-in-law, how could there be a misunderstanding? But regarding the matter of making you wait for so long, please don't tell Mr. Williams about it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to show myself to him."
As Tyler spoke, he took out his pen. Even before hearing their pitch, he signed his name on the contract in a very flamboyant manner. For the rest of the meeting, he didn't have a single criticism of Lily's project proposal and was only curious to find out more. Originally, the other Blue Water Export Company's representatives had already carefully prepared a large number of excuses to give to Ralph Hartman on why they failed to land the project. But now it seemed that they had no reason to doubt their chances, especially with the way Tyler Dawn addressed Lily as his sister-in-law throughout the meeting. After half an hour, Tyler Dawn personally walked Lily and her colleagues out of the KWTD Corporation's main entrance.
"Wow, Mrs. Williams, I didn't think you would have such a close relationship with Tyler Dawn.
One of her team members exclaimed. "He's quite an influential figure in the business world." "Mrs. Williams, I really admire you. From now on, please be my work mentor so that I can have a career like yours someday." Another one praised her. While her co-workers from the Blue Water Export Company continued to excitedly celebrate their successful meeting, Lily didn't feel the slightest bit of pleasure or pride. This was because she knew that Tyler Dawn had only agreed to do the project with them because of Kevin. Just as she and her co-workers turned around to leave, a group of people suddenly blocked their way. They were led by none other than Emma Larson. "Lily, are you also here to pitch your company's project proposal? Did they even let you in the door?" Emma Larson spoke in a childish tone as soon as she came face to face with Lily. She even deliberately lifted her chin and sneered at Lily and the others with a look of contempt. In the KWTD Corporation Chicago branch, Tyler Dawn apologized to Lily for making her wait, addressing her as his sister-in-law. This shocked everyone in the room, including Lily. Tyler then asked her not to tell Kevin about this. Without even taking the time to hear Lily's proposal, he quickly signed the contract to award the project to the Blue Water Export Company. Listening to all the praise from her coworkers after the meeting, Lily knew deep down that Tyler had only agreed to the partnership due to Kevin. Just as they were about to leave, a group led by Emma Larson suddenly blocked their way and started mocking her childishly and contemptuously. "Emma Larson, what are you doing here?" Lily asked in surprise. When Lily first came to the Blue Water Export Company for her interview, there were actually more than a dozen other people who had been interviewed one after another before her. But in the end, she was the only one who ended up being hired. Lily still didn't know why. "What else would I be doing here? Of course I'm representing our company to discuss a partnership with the KWTD Corporation. You guys probably can't even get through the company's door, am I right?" Emma crossed her arms in front of her chest and bragged. After leaving Corwin Tower, the Night King frowned and looked at the sky. His eyes flashed with the image of someone that he hadn't thought about for many years. "It seems like it's time to talk to him," the Night King uttered with a sigh. Then he took one last look at Corwin Tower before turning his head and instantly disappearing from where he stood as if he'd never even been there. After Kevin checked on Elijah Tanner and his brothers, he went over to the window and looked out at the city. He had a thoughtful look in his eyes as he replayed in his head what the Night King had said to him just moments before. Why did the Night King act so coldly and angrily all of a sudden? What is he hiding from me? Kevin thought to himself. At the moment, his mind was flooded with questions on top of questions, and without any answers, this made him feel very uneasy. About 10 minutes later, the Tanner brothers slowly opened their eyes. In an instant, the five of them jumped up vigilantly, searching for any danger in the surroundings. After a few seconds, they saw Kevin by the window. "Mr. Williams!" The five of them called out to him in shame. In the past 24 hours, the Tanner brothers had already fallen asleep twice without warning, and they felt embarrassed for not being able to guard and protect Kevin on both occasions. The first time was because of poisoning, so it was still reasonable. But the second time, they were simply exhausted. Was it really just because they were tired from destroying the semi-invisible barriers and dispersing all traces of the green snake poison from Corwin Tower? Moments before they fell asleep, they felt a powerful presence nearby. Had someone attacked them from behind again? The five of them had agreed to follow Kevin so they could help him resolve his troubles, not to have him protect their lives instead. Given this, how could they explain their incompetence to him? Don't blame yourselves for what just happened. The person who came by isn't someone that you can fight against. Kevin understood their guilt and confusion.
"Mr. Williams, are you all right?"
Elijah Tanner's face couldn't help but turn red. "I'm fine, but I have something that I need you guys to do for me." Kevin turned around and looked at the five of them with a serious expression.
"Mr. Williams, feel free to tell us what to do."
Elijah replied as all the Tanner brothers straightened their backs and listened attentively to what Kevin was about to tell them. "I want to formally bring you guys into the Radiance. From now on, Elijah and Felix, the two of you will stay by my side. As for Sage, Tyson, and Yale, The three of you will select 300 elite experts from the Radiants. Then you'll divide them into 3 groups, with each one under the command of one of you as their team leader. Use the fastest and most effective method you know to train them into becoming the most powerful warriors that they can be. In 2 months' time, I'll check each group's progress," Kevin instructed. After pausing for a moment, Kevin added, "I know it won't be easy, but there's one thing that I can promise you. I know that you'll be needing all kinds of herbal pills to help you and your respective teams get stronger, and I'll make sure to provide an abundant supply to you. I don't care about the cost, but I want to see results, so do your best."
"Yes, Mr. Williams."
Elijah and Felix Tanner bowed their heads while Sage Tanner and the other 2 knelt on one knee as a sign of acceptance. In Ottawa County, a rural county in Michigan that was almost 200 miles away from Chicago, Alan and Susan Williams leisurely strolled along the road near their home. 3 female bodyguards silently followed behind the couple.
"The countryside is still better. The air is much fresher than in the city."
Alan Williams looked at the scenery in the distance and declared with a satisfied look on his face, "I wonder how Kevin has been recently. We didn't even call him when we left." Susan Williams remarked worriedly,
"Don't worry about him. Our son is a very capable young man. Besides, I believe he already knows where we are."
Alan laughed and tried to comfort her. Suddenly, a gentle breeze hit his face. With that, the smile on Alan Williams's face immediately froze.
"The 3 of you can head back home with my wife. I'll just go and check something out up ahead."
Alan instructed the 3 bodyguards as he let go of Susan's hand and hurriedly walked forward with big steps. At the entrance of the KWTD Corporation, Emma Larson gazed disdainfully at the people from the Blue Water Export Company. In truth, she was only targeting Lily. "I don't have time to waste with you, Emma. I still have to bring my team back to the company headquarters." Lily's temper had also risen. "Look at you, working so hard to go up the corporate ladder. But Kevin is so rich. How can he bear to let you go to work? Could it be that the CEO of the Williams Company no longer wants to support you?" Emma Larson asked in a daring tone. The people who passed by and Lily's co-workers from the Blue Water Export Company were all stunned to hear this. No one had expected Lily to be the wife of the president of the Williams Company.
"No wonder Tyler Dawn was being so polite to her,"
the people from the Blue Water Export Company thought to themselves. Now they finally understood why Ralph Hartman and Sid Bramler had been taking extra care of Lily as well. "If your husband truly loves you, then you can just stay at home every day and be pampered. But since you're out here working, is it because he no longer likes you?" The more Emma spoke, the more condescending she became. "You don't need to know about my personal life." Lily's face became angrier and angrier. "I understand. It must be Kevin who dumped you, right?" Emma suddenly laughed. "Lily, I thought you were really good at catching men, especially since you married the CEO of the Williams Company. And after he bought the Blue Water Export Company, I assumed that he did it for you. But now that he dumped you, I wonder what you did to make your husband dislike you so much." "What did you just say?" Lily was suddenly stunned. "Didn't you know? Kevin now owns the Blue Water Export Company. But if he really loves you, then why would he let you be hired as a lowly employee?" Emma said with a sneer. In fact, after Emma Larson left the Blue Water Export Company that day, she kept her promise to Sid Bramler, and the 2 of them found a hotel room to fool around in later that night. After fulfilling her end of the deal, Sid Bramler told her to bear with things for a while. Given that Kevin had just bought the company, he had no choice but to hire Lily at the time. However, he promised to recruit Emma Larson as soon as he found a way to get Lily fired from the Blue Water Export Company. Upon hearing Emma Larson's words, Lily was completely stunned and dropped the contract in her hand. While one of her teammates behind her quickly bent down to pick it up, Emma Larson suddenly caught a glimpse of Tyler Dawn's signature on the paper. The smile on her face instantly froze. You actually managed to land the contract with the KWTD Corporation?" Emma Larson exclaimed in disbelief. She knew that no one had the courage to forge Tyler Dawn's name. Moreover, they were standing at the entrance of the KWTD Corporation. However, Lily didn't care about all of this at the moment. Kevin was the only one in her mind as tears kept falling from her eyes. Now she finally understood that Kevin didn't care if she had the courage to stand in front of him as a successful woman or not. And yet he had silently gone to great lengths just to make her feel important and valued in her new job. Because of this, her heart was now filled with regret and guilt for resenting him earlier. "Hubby," Lily began to sob. She covered her mouth with both hands and pushed Emma Larson away with her elbows. Then she quickly ran in the direction of the Salix Leaf Complex. Unfortunately, as she was crossing the road, she was too distracted to notice that a white BMW was heading towards her and got hit. As she fell to the ground, Lily felt that her world was spinning, and the pain was so intense that it made her brain go numb. With wounds all over her head and body, she soon fell unconscious in a pool of blood. "Director Williams!" The people from the Blue Water Export Company immediately panicked and called for an ambulance. Inside the Huxley's family's mansion in St. Louis, there were multiple bloodstains all over the floor, and the ground was filled with the dead bodies of the Huxley family's members. At the moment, Virgil Huxley was keeping his son Thornton behind his back, slowly inching back step by step. His eyes were wide open and his body was trembling nonstop. His face was pale and expressionless, and the panic in his heart had made him forget all other thoughts. You would have had to be there personally in order to understand Virgil Huxley's current feelings as he watched all his family members die one after another at the hands of Spencer and the Radiants. Their once joyful laughs had turned into sounds of wailing and begging, but as the head of the Huxley family, he could only stand there and watch helplessly. This feeling of powerlessness and heart-wrenching pain made Virgil Huxley, who had usually been in high spirits in the company of his relatives, feel extreme grief. "Perhaps this is a good time to take a break and have a chat with you, Mr. Huxley." Spencer wiped the blood off his face with his hands and smiled cruelly. "You bastard! You're a bunch of heartless animals!" Thornton Huxley's eyes turned red. If his father hadn't tried his best to stop him, he would have rushed forward and fought with Spencer and the others without hesitation. "You call us heartless bastards? You're certainly the one to talk, Mr. Huxley. We may be the ones wielding blades right now, but we live by a code of ethics, and we're only out here to seek justice for what you've done. So if you still don't want to tell the truth, I wouldn't mind wiping your family from the face of the earth right in front of you." After Spencer said this, he raised the cold blade in his hand and pointed it directly at Thornton Huxley. "No, you can't hurt my son." Virgil was completely flustered. The current situation was very clear. The future of the Huxley family was at the mercy of Spencer and his men. And with all of the other Huxley family members already dead, only father and son remained. Virgil Huxley was already old, but Thornton was still young. And as long as Thornton didn't die, the Huxley family would still have a chance to rise again in the future. Now that Thornton Huxley was his family's only hope, Virgil couldn't let his only son get hurt no matter what, even if it meant that he had to die in his place instead. "If you really don't want anything to happen to your son, you'd better answer my next question honestly." Spencer said each word with a cold smile as a violent aura emitted from his body. "All right. What do you want to know?" Virgil sounded defeated at the moment. He had long lost his usual bravado. "Tell me, who are you working with to harm Mr. Williams in Chicago?" Spencer asked sternly. "Wait, are you people from the Radiants?" Virgil's pupils grew wide. He had only suspected this earlier. After all, Kevin was the only one who had a conflict with him in Chicago. However, when he heard Spencer mention his name just now, his heart was still filled with shock once his suspicions had been confirmed. How could Kevin have such an elite expert on his side? Why didn't he receive any information about it before this? "That's not the answer I wanted to hear," Spencer coldly replied. "This is your last chance to save what's left of the Huxley family. I won't ask you again, so answer my question now." "Don't bother wasting your time. I'm sure Kevin's already dead by now." Virgil suddenly burst into laughter. When he heard this, Spencer frowned slightly. Then he quickly took 2 steps forward and kicked Virgil Huxley in the chest, sending him flying 10 feet away. As Virgil fell to the ground with a heavy thud, he spurted out a mouthful of blood.
Dad!
Thornton Huxley was completely enraged. With his spiritual energy revolving around him, he shouted,
You must pay for this!
As he lunged frantically at Spencer, Thornton Huxley acted as if he didn't care about his life anymore. He just wanted all these people to die. Virgil Huxley had just watched helplessly as Spencer and the members of the Radiants killed all of his family, leaving only him and Thornton alive. With the future of the Huxley family depending on Thornton's survival, Spencer threatened to kill him if Virgil didn't reveal who had attacked Kevin in Chicago. Confirming his suspicions that Spencer and his men belonged to the Radiants, Virgil replied that Kevin was probably dead already, which led to Spencer kicking him in the chest. When Thornton saw his father spurting a mouthful of blood, he angrily sought revenge and lunged at Spencer, no longer caring if he died as long as everyone else there perished too. But with only a lower power base and no combat training experience, how could he compare to Spencer, who was wielding a sharp blade and was used to fighting every single day of the year? Before he could even throw a punch, Thornton was sent flying by a simple slap from Spencer's palm. When he crashed heavily onto the ground, no one knew whether he was dead or alive.
Thornton!
Virgil Huxley forcefully endured the pain in his chest as he tried to get back up. Tears flowed from his eyes continuously as regret filled his heart. Faced with the devastating loss of the entire Huxley family, Virgil knew that all this bloodshed could have been avoided, and instead of being blinded by his greed back then, he should have sincerely supported Kevin and the Radiants when they wanted to move into St. Louis, as the Swinton and Thompson families had done.
Mr. Huxley, are you going to answer my question or not? I don't want to waste any more time.
Holding the cold blade in his hand, Spencer slowly walked towards Thornton Huxley. Each step that Spencer took as he inched closer to Thornton made Virgil Huxley's heart beat faster and faster.
It's the Zucker family,
Virgil shouted anxiously.
Thank you.
A strange smile appeared on Spencer's face.
See? Was that so difficult to do?
As Spencer withdrew his blade, Virgil Huxley's face seemed frozen as he rushed over to check on his son. Just then, the sound of several footsteps could be heard from outside, and when Spencer turned around, he saw Richard Swinton, Joseph Thompson, Dylan Hill, and a few others running over to them in a hurry. Seeing all the corpses and blood on the floor, some of the more faint-hearted people couldn't help but throw up.
Spencer, what have you done? You've caused such a huge disaster.
Dylan Hill walked up to him and chewed him out.
Virgil Huxley colluded with the Zucker family in an attempt to murder Mr. Williams in Chicago. For his actions, he had to pay a price, so it was justifiable for the Radiants to kill his entire family.
Spencer seemed very calm, as if he was talking about a trivial matter.
But
Dylan Hill wanted to say something, but in the end he couldn't find the words. With that, he simply let out a long sigh. Richard Swinton and Joseph Thompson looked at each other at the same time. They could see deep regret and anxiety in each other's eyes. Back in Ottawa County, Alan Williams seemed to be walking aimlessly through a cornfield. However, compared to before, his body's aura had changed drastically, and his eyes were vigilantly scanning his surroundings from left to right.
Since I already know you're here, what's the point of hiding? My wife should already be home by now, so no one's watching.
Alan Williams stopped in his tracks as soon as he stepped out of the cornfield.
It seems like you're not that senile yet.
An aged voice sounded from all directions at the same time. Suddenly, the Night King appeared next to Alan Williams, seemingly out of thin air.
I may be old, but my senses are as sharp as ever.
Alan crossed his arms behind his back and didn't even look at him.
If you're old, then what am I?
The Night King lightly shook his head and continued.
Besides, isn't age just a number? And with all that fierce strength in you, will a stubborn man like you ever submit to Father Time?
Alan Williams didn't answer this question. He just quietly looked at the scenery in the distance. For a while, the Night King was also silent. "After all these years, you suddenly came all the way here just to see me. Are you here because of Kevin?" Alan Williams was the first to break the silence. "Your son is overly ambitious and has involved himself in too many affairs in just a short amount of time. As his mentor, I'm concerned that he's not just spreading himself too thin, but he's also come into contact with forces that he isn't strong enough to handle at the moment." The Night King shared in a benevolent tone, compared to the overbearing manner he had when he scolded Kevin. "Are you talking about the Morris family and the Herbalist Society?" Alan asked with a faint smile. "For Kevin, those two major powers may indeed be a little difficult to deal with, but they're far from a threat to his life. Kevin has grown in status and power way too fast. With all the enemies that he's picked up along the way, isn't he digging his own grave at this point? At this rate, he can easily die with one wrong move." The Night King replied with great concern. "I understand that there are risks, but I also think that you're underestimating what my son is capable of. Besides, if Kevin can defeat these two forces to further establish his prestige among the great powers, wouldn't that be a good thing for him?" Alan remarked very calmly. If anyone else had heard him say this, they would certainly think that Alan Williams had gone crazy. Given how powerful the Morris family and the Herbalist Society were, how could he let Kevin go up against them? Back in Corwin Tower, Kevin was just about to take the Tanner brothers back to the Radiance's headquarters when he suddenly received a phone call from the hospital.
"Is this Mr. Williams? Your wife Lily is currently undergoing surgery in the operating room,"
a man informed him. What happened? Kevin suddenly jumped up from his chair, his face full of shock.
"Mr. Williams will explain the situation when you get here. Please come to the hospital immediately."
Right after the man said this, he abruptly hung up the phone on Kevin. "Just wait for me here. There's been an emergency." Kevin didn't have time to explain the details to Elijah Tanner and the others. He picked up his car keys and ran out of the apartment. In the corridor of the hospital, Ralph Hartman and Sid Bramler were anxiously pacing back and forth. They kept staring at the door of the operating room from time to time as they waited for any updates on Lily's condition.
"It's over. Mr. Williams will definitely kill us this time."
Sid Bramler scratched the back of his head with both hands.
"I hope Mrs. Williams makes it out of surgery alive. She wasn't hurt too badly, was she?"
Ralph Hartman kept muttering the same thing as he tried to calm down his nerves. A few minutes later, Kevin hurriedly rushed in and came over to them. "What happened?"
"Mr. Williams."
Ralph Hartman and Sid Bramler greeted him respectfully at the same time. As soon as they saw him, Lily's other co-workers from the Blue Water Export Company immediately stopped whatever they were doing and looked at Kevin with a hint of envy in their eyes. After all, this was the CEO of the Williams Company, arguably the most powerful business figure in all of Chicago. He wasn't someone that lowly employees like them could meet on a daily basis. "How's Lily doing now?" Kevin asked anxiously.
"Mr. Williams, please calm yourself down. Your wife is currently in the operating room."
Ralph Hartman braced himself and replied in a low voice. "I already know that. Now can someone explain to me what the hell is going on? How did this happen to her?" A hint of anger was simmering inside of Kevin when he asked this. Inside a mansion in the suburbs of Chicago, Brett Stewart, Roger Knott, and Milton Brown were sitting around a table in the main hall. The smell of sandalwood surrounded them while an incense stick was quietly burning at the center of the table.
"Did you find out what happened? Who did this to Kevin and me?"
Brett Stewart slowly fiddled with his cup of coffee.
"Our men have received news that only the people from the Zucker family in St. Louis still use the green snake poison these days."
"Our men have received news that only the people from the Zucker family in St. Louis still use the green snake poison these days,"
Milton Brown replied respectfully.
"The Zucker family? I have no grudges against them. Why would they attack me?
Brett furrowed his brows as he placed his cup of coffee on the table.
The people from the Zucker family must have been after Kevin. It just so happened that you came by to meet with him, Supreme Commander.
Roger Knott replied with a troubled expression.
And what kind of conflict does Kevin have with them?
Brett asked as he courteously poured a cup of coffee each for Roger Knott and Milton Brown. When he finished speaking, neither of them answered. They'd already investigated Kevin's activities in St. Louis, and he never appeared to have any contact with the Zucker family. And without any clear source of conflict, they didn't understand why the Zucker family would send anyone to assassinate him in Chicago either.
Supreme Commander, do you want to teach the Zucker family a lesson?
Milton asked with a solemn expression.
Investigate the Zucker family's activities as soon as possible. I want to know their every move,
Brett Stewart said with a thoughtful smile.
Didn't Kevin want to help the Radiants expand their strength in St. Louis? As his brother, it's only natural for me to help him as well.
Roger Knott and Milton Brown looked at each other after hearing what Brett Stewart said. At the moment, both of them were quite angry in their hearts. Brett Stewart was the Supreme Commander of the Myriads, and Kevin was their deputy leader. Given this, the members of the Zucker family were very bold to have actually dared to launch a sneak attack on their leaders. In all the years since the Myriads had been established, this was the first time they'd ever been faced with a provocation like that. And if the Zucker family had succeeded in poisoning either of them, who would continue to view the Myriads as a powerful organization in the future? In a secluded room in the hospital, the driver who had injured Lily was brought over by Mitchell Cook. He knelt in front of Kevin with a pale face.
Did you think that you could just run away after a stunt like that?
Kevin had a distressed look on his face. He looked down at the man as he questioned him.
I was wrong. I won't do it again.
The man kept his head lowered before Kevin as his entire body trembled in fear. Mitchell Cook looked at Kevin and said respectfully,
We've already investigated the matter thoroughly, and you're not going to like what you hear.
When Kevin got the news that Lily was in the hospital, he grabbed his car keys and rushed over. After he arrived in the hospital room, Mitchell Cook told him that he'd investigated the accident and he brought the driver of the car that had hit Lily. The man was shaking in fear and begging for forgiveness. Mitchell filled Kevin in on what he'd uncovered about the accident.
After Lily came out of the KWTD Corporation building, she was crossing the street at a green light at the intersection. This is the man who ran the red light. After hitting her, he took advantage of the delay while the people from the Blue Water Export Company were calling an ambulance and drove away in a panic.
With the resources Mitchell had, it was easy for him to find all the information he needed on anyone in Chicago whenever he wanted to. A hit and run? In broad daylight? Kevin looked like he wanted to kill someone. He suddenly kicked the man, sending him flying through the air and crashing into the wall. "Take him outside and show him what we do to hit-and-run drivers," Kevin shouted at his aides to handle the guy. Kevin would absolutely not show this man any mercy after what he did to Lily, nor would he give him a chance to explain himself. Mitchell Cook didn't say anything. He waved his hand at the people who were standing next to him. A few men tacitly understood what he meant and stepped forward. They grabbed the man and dragged him outside. This kind of swift and decisive action made the people from the Blue Water Export Company who were watching the scene gasp in horror. However, they didn't dare to make any sound, fearing that they would anger Kevin. Especially Ralph Hartman and Sid Bramler. When they recalled what Kevin had done to them, they couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Compared to what he'd done to the hit-and-run driver, Kevin had actually treated them with kid gloves. Lily was still in surgery, so there was nothing more Kevin could do at the moment. He patted Mitchell Cook on the shoulder as he walked over to the window. More than 10 men in black were standing around them in a circle to prevent anyone from disturbing their conversation. "Mitch, I want you to help me look into some things. See how many companies in Chicago have been secretly purchased recently. There are also some residential buildings, especially a few that were previously unsold. Now someone's suddenly living there, Kevin said thoughtfully.
No problem, Kevin.
Mitchell Cook rubbed his chin and added,
But what's the use of investigating these things?
He didn't understand why Kevin was suddenly interested in following these leads. The Williams Company and the Salix Leaf Hotel had become the biggest real estate holders in Chicago. If Kevin really wanted to invest in some property, he should set his sights on the empty land that had been developed for construction. There are some things that you haven't found out about yet, but don't worry. I'll tell you everything one of these days, Kevin reassured him sincerely. He didn't want to spread any news about the Pinnacle, not yet anyway. However, since the Night King had already said that a large number of people had already made their way to Chicago, then the most likely sign would be a change in property values. The way Kevin saw it, the people from the major schools had to find some place to sleep. They couldn't have their meetings out in the street, could they? In the meeting room of the Radiance's St. Louis branch, many influential people had gathered together and were whispering quietly to each other. Joseph Thompson and Richard Swinton were sitting patiently, looking like they were deep in thought. It was difficult for anyone in St. Louis to keep a secret anymore. The news about the Huxley family had spread across the entire city, especially after they found out that it was the Radiants who had done it. Many people started to feel very worried about what was going on. Even if it had been a good idea to wipe out the entire Huxley family, the proper moment hadn't come yet. Spencer had acted a little too hastily. The group of dignitaries began to get more and more excited as time went by. They'd let the Radiants and the Huxley family fight with each other in secret. To interfere could have been bad for business, and that's how they'd operated for many years.
The Radiance has gone too far this time. Obviously, St. Louis isn't a priority for them, one of them commented.
The Huxley family is one of the most powerful families in the world. How could they have been destroyed just like that?
Another one asked worriedly.
If they don't have a reasonable explanation, I think the Radiants really ought to leave St. Louis,
someone else demanded. They were all used to seeing families and companies fighting for resources, but the sudden extermination of an entire family was too much to bear. There was a feeling of impending doom in the large room. A few minutes later, the door to the conference room was pushed open from the outside. Spencer came in, walking side by side with Dylan Hill. He looked around the room. Wherever Spencer turned his head, people lowered their heads to avoid making eye contact with him. He wasn't bothered by all the talking, but the confrontational attitude was another thing.
I think you all have some sympathy for what happened to the Huxley family, but it's my responsibility to tell you that Virgil Huxley brought all of it on himself,
Spencer explained loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear him. Without mincing his words, he got straight to the point and accused the Huxley family of causing their own downfall. Many people couldn't help but be nervous when they heard what Spencer had to say. Now that Virgil Huxley was dead, no matter what Spencer said, there was nobody there who could defend the man.
I know you all have grudges, but I have a recording here. Please listen to it quietly.
Spencer took out a recorder pen and hit the play button. They could clearly hear Virgil Huxley's voice. Of course, they could also hear the Huxley family members begging for their lives as they were wiped out. It made everyone's hair stand on end. Some of the more timid ones turned pale and felt like they were going to puke. On a country road in Michigan, Alan Williams and the Night King were standing side by side. The wild wind was whistling through their clothes.
You don't have to worry too much about that problem with Kevin, and you don't have to mention my issues in front of him. All you need to do is protect his life,
Alan Williams said sadly. His face was expressionless.
You're thinking very calmly.
The Night King turned his head slightly and looked at him out of the corner of his eye.
Well, since you've chosen to stir things up, let's see how powerful Kevin really is.
Alan smiled and told him candidly.
It's late, and I have to head home for dinner. Otherwise, my wife will start to get worried.
Alan Williams didn't stay for long. He turned around and walked towards his home.
Alan, aren't you worried about the pinnacle?
The Night King couldn't resist asking him.
We can't avoid our destiny. Some things can't be changed. Night King, can't you see where the hope of the foundation of humanity itself lies?
Alan said without turning his head.
And tell those two old men in the Herbalist Society and the people in the Morris family that they'd better not do anything to Kevin. If they do, I'll personally go to the Capitol and tear down their little nest. They'll pay with their lives.
A smile suddenly appeared on Night King's lips when he heard that. He understood that Alan Williams, who had been hiding his strength and biding his time for many years, still had some fire left inside. It was just that he didn't let anybody see that side of him. But Kevin could definitely trigger him to reveal his true power. Another gust of wild wind blew by, but the Night King had already disappeared and only a few branches were left, swaying in the breeze. In the headquarters of the Herbalist Society in Washington, D.C., a middle-aged man angrily threw his coffee mug across the room, smashing it into pieces. A few of the Society's senior members hurriedly bowed their heads as sweat poured down from their foreheads.
What an arrogant and suicidal path he's chosen. Kenneth Wilkinson has already sapped all the strength of our society in the Midwest area?
The man gave a hard kick to his office chair and threw it onto the floor. The senior members trembled in fear as they heard the loud crash. The news of the Midwest branch betraying the Herbalist Society had spread throughout all of Washington, D.C. While many were shocked by the news, a lot of them almost laughed out loud.
Nadia Alexander is extremely audacious and Kenneth Wilkinson deserves to die. How dare she plot against the Herbalist Society?
The middle-aged man complained while gnashing his teeth in anger. His body was giving off a frightening and deadly aura.
Don't you want to settle the matter of the power pill with the Radiants? Do you really think that the Herbalist Society is so weak?
The man was seething with anger. Chairman, please calm down. Several of the senior members pleaded at the same time. They had no idea what to do, and this wasn't a joking matter. At the Herbalist Society's headquarters in Washington, D.C., a middle-aged man was throwing a fit in response to what Nadia Alexander and Kenneth Wilkinson had done. The senior members in the room with him had no idea what to do. They were so frightened by his frustrated outburst. The middle-aged man was the chairman of the Herbalist Society, and he was known as the #1 herbalist in the entire world. Although he hadn't fought in many years, no one in the world dared to doubt his level of power and training. The chairman had held his office for many years, a mighty figure who had led the Herbalist Society to a reputation as the leader in herbalism. Who would dare to doubt his ability?
Calm down? How can I calm down? Now our entire Midwest branch has joined the Radiants. How can I calm down after being slapped in the face like this?
The chairman roared furiously. His words were mixed with a fit of powerful anger and seemingly limitless spiritual energy. All the items in the room were rattling as his voice thundered. One of the senior members gathered the courage to speak to him.
The most important thing for you to do is to send someone to clean up the mess in the Midwest while there's still a chance. It's true that the mess in the Midwest needs someone to straighten it out, but the Radiants must pay the price for what they've done. Otherwise, every group out there will think they can poach our members without any consequences.
The chairman replied in a stern voice. The vicious look in his eyes became stronger and stronger, and along with the adrenaline running through his body, you could tell what his state of mind was.
Pass along my order. Team 3, Team 4, and Team 5 go down south immediately and find the exact whereabouts of Kenneth Wilkinson, he shouted. The chairman waved his arms and bellowed, Do as you're told, and kill anyone who dares to get in your way.
The surgery at the hospital had been going on for 3 hours. Kevin was standing like a statue in front of the window. The vibes he was giving off made people shrink back. Ralph, Hartman, and the others didn't dare to make a sound. They just stood along the wall, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, they could hear hurried footsteps coming from down the hall. Tyler Dawn ran up to Kevin with a pained expression on his face.
Kevin? Kevin?
Tyler Dawn stammered as he tried to get his attention. He'd been in a company meeting, so he just found out about the accident. Lily was only a member of the Blue Water Export Company after all. And very few people knew about Tyler's relationship with Kevin, so they hadn't bothered to interrupt the meeting to tell him what had happened. That was why it was only after the meeting ended that Tyler Dawn heard about the news of Lily's accident. "What's wrong, Tyler?" Kevin asked as he gave him a puzzled look.
"I'm sorry, Kevin. I'm responsible for this."
Tyler Dawn bowed his head and looked down at the floor as he spoke to Kevin. Tyler obviously felt guilty about Lily's accident because it happened on KWTD property. "No need to apologize. I know this had nothing to do with you," Kevin said in an understanding tone. "But thanks for coming down here." While they were talking, the door of the operating theater suddenly opened. A large group of people came out one after another. Everyone looked exhausted. Kevin quickly walked up and asked, "Doctor, how is my wife doing?"
"The surgery was successful. The patient is out of danger now, but she needs to rest for a while."
After the surgeon quickly updated Kevin on Lily's condition, he left to get some rest. A little while later, in the most advanced room available in the hospital, Kevin looked at Lily, who was lying on the bed looking very pale. His heart was aching for her. "You can all head home now," Kevin said quietly. "You've been in the hospital for a long time, and I'm sure you need to get some sleep."
"Then we'll leave, President Williams, but you don't need to worry anymore. After all, Lily is out of danger now,"
Ralph Hartman said with a friendly smile.
"Take care of yourself, sir,"
Sid Bramler mumbled vaguely, unsure what else to say. Soon, only Tyler Dawn remained in the room with Kevin and Lily. He remained silent as he stood there with his hands behind his back and his head lowered like a child who'd made a mistake and was waiting to be punished. Kevin stayed with Lily and kept talking to her. He didn't care if she could hear him or not as he spoke to her continuously with tears streaming down his cheeks. "You have to be more careful, honey. You got into a car accident when I wasn't around to watch you." Kevin brushed a hair off of Lily's face. "You're so silly. What would you do if I weren't around?" After a while, he said, "Lily, you deserve a good rest, but I need to tell you the truth." He paused for a moment and whispered, "Actually, I don't care what anyone thinks. We should stand together as equals. We're husband and wife, and what's mine is yours. But the Williams Company is too conspicuous and draws a lot of attention." Kevin brushed Lily's cheek again and then told her, "There are a lot of things that I don't know how to explain to you. The only thing I can say is you need to trust me, okay? After I've settled everything, I'll take you with me away from Chicago, to a place where no one can find us." To be honest, Kevin didn't want to live such a tiring life. If it weren't for all the people coercing him to do all these things, he really just wanted to live an ordinary life with Lily. But the Williams family was also a member of the foundation, and they were forcing him to take on a role he wasn't sure that he wanted. After a long time, Kevin finally finished telling Lily everything he was thinking, even though he wasn't sure if she was aware that he was even there. He gently straightened out Lily's blanket, turned around, and gave Tyler Dawn a sad look. Kevin found a quiet place to talk with Tyler. "You've been waiting for me for a long time. What important matter did you have to tell me?"
"By the way, Kevin, when I was in the room just now, I couldn't hear anything you were saying."
Tyler Dawn wasn't in a hurry to talk about his problem, but started to blabber a little. "Go on. If you have something to say, say it. If not, then you should leave," Kevin warned his friend.
"Well, Kevin, I really have something to talk to you about."
Tyler seemed to be very concerned, and Kevin was a little surprised to see him like this.
"Several groups of people have gotten in touch with me lately. They want to form partnerships with the Williams Company through the KWTD Corporation. They want me to take the refining method of the power pill from your mobile phone," Tyler explained to him anxiously. "You know what I'm worth right now. Obviously, the people who came looking for me are all working secretly for some powerful families."
Kevin was upset when he heard this. He understood that the major schools weren't behind this problem. For the Central Alternative Healing Academy to be able to make it into the top 10 schools, it had to improve its reputation. The truly powerful people were from families that worked behind the scenes, hidden from prying eyes. However, these people were usually untraceable. It was surprising that they'd come looking for him. "Do you know where they came from?" Kevin asked with a solemn expression on his face.
"I'm not sure. They must have a lot of resources and training to be able to remain off the grid like that. It's tough to do anything privately these days without someone finding out."
Tyler replied candidly. "Tomorrow afternoon, I'll visit your office. When the time comes, call someone over to meet with you. If there's anything to say, we can talk about it face to face." Kevin smiled knowingly at Tyler. In the Radiance branch of St. Louis, after Spencer turned off the recording of Virgil Huxley's voice, the meeting room fell into silence. Did the Huxley family really collude with the Zucker family to plot against Kevin? This news was completely unexpected. Everyone there knew that Kevin was one of the higher-ups of the Radiance. Virgil Huxley's actions were outrageous and could easily lead to his demise. Based on this news, nobody would blame the Radiance for launching a large-scale attack in retaliation.
I wonder if any of you have any other opinions. If anyone else thinks that Virgil Huxley's crime isn't enough to warrant death, please stand up and explain your reasoning, but don't ask me why I didn't explain it to you in advance. The Radiance doesn't need your permission to do anything."
Spencer lightly slapped the table, causing a loud bang that startled many people in the room. Joseph Thompson suddenly gave Richard Swinton a strange look. The Zucker family of St. Louis had close ties with the Swinton family.
"Why are you looking at me?"
Richard asked him with an unhappy expression. Joseph Thompson looked around to make sure that nobody was paying any attention to the two of them. He turned his head to the side and whispered,
"Aren't you going to ask Frida Zucker?"
"What does this have to do with her? Why don't you go and ask her yourself?"
Richard Swinton's heart started pounding in his chest.
"This has nothing to do with me."
Joseph Thompson had a puzzled look on his face.
"I'll find her and ask her about it. I really hope she didn't participate in this whole mess,"
Richard said hesitantly. In his eyes, you could see a deep sadness emerging. At the Radiance's meeting in St. Louis, Spencer had just finished playing the recording of Virgil Huxley's voice that proved the Huxley and Zucker families had plotted against Kevin. Everyone was stunned. Joseph Thompson knew that the Swinton family had close ties with the Zucker family. Richard promised Joseph that he'd contact Frida Zucker to find out the truth. There was a lot of painful history between him and Frida Zucker, even though they were no longer the ignorant youths that they were back in the day. However, there were some things that happened that they would remember for the rest of their lives. If Richard Swinton could do anything about it, he really hoped that nothing would happen to Frida Zucker or to Kevin. However, the Zucker family was like a moth flying too close to a flame, and they were bound to get burned. The best that he could do would be to show Frida Zucker the way back to the right path. Back in Chicago, Kevin was standing in a hospital room looking at Adriana Wright, Emos Squire, and Gilbert Rhodes. They were all lying in hospital beds recovering from their injuries. He slowly clenched his fists. No one could imagine the fury in Kevin's heart at that moment. The three of them had been attacked at the same time, and the only obvious thing that they had in common was that they knew Kevin. However, Kevin still had no idea what possible benefit the attackers wanted to get out of this horrible crime. But it was clear that the person wanted to get Kevin's attention, and what better way than to hurt three of his closest friends? "Have you found out what happened?" Kevin asked sternly.
President Wright and the others were attacked in their own offices. The attackers seem to have been their most trusted employees.
Mitchell Cook's face was also very glum.
The culprits are in custody now, but
But what? Kevin suddenly had a bad feeling.
The police have intervened in this matter. After all, although President Wright has the pills you gave her for her training, your friends really have nothing to do with the major schools or powers. And because they're all well-known figures in the Chicago region, the police have stated that they want to investigate this matter thoroughly,
Mitchell Cook said very apprehensively. Although the three of them were rich and influential, they didn't have any real power beyond their wealth, and everyone had to avoid breaking any laws or attracting the attention of the Justice Department, no matter which school or organization they belonged to. When Kevin heard this, an indescribable worry appeared in his eyes. He vaguely felt that the person who was behind this attack wasn't an ordinary opponent. I'm not bound by the rules of the major schools, so which technique should I use to handle this? Kevin thought to himself. He'd been busy lately with some matters related to the major powers. Because of that, he'd forgotten about the rules he had to follow in the everyday world, state and federal law for one thing. Who could be out to get me? Kevin muttered to himself as he ran through the list of people who might want to get even with him. The Herbalist Society and the Morris family would show more self-control than this. Are the attackers from St. Louis? That's impossible. Kevin racked his brain to figure out who would commit a crime like this. Then it suddenly dawned on him. He thought of someone who held real power in Chicago and also had a personal grudge against him. It was Commissioner Campbell, one of the six-man group. Just as he was considering the implications of this, Kevin's phone suddenly rang. It was Dylan Hill calling him. Kevin walked to the window and answered the call. What's wrong? Has something happened in St. Louis?
Mr. Williams, you might need to be mentally prepared for what I have to tell you.
Dylan Hill didn't know exactly what to say. Don't worry about that. Just tell me what's going on. Kevin's expression became more and more fearsome. Even though the Night King told him not to get involved in the problems down in St. Louis, he'd already played half of the game. He couldn't quit now, could he?
Spencer took his men to eliminate the Huxley family, and he killed Virgil Huxley with his own hands. Right now, Thornton Huxley is the only member of the family still alive.
Dylan Hill briefly explained what had happened.
Now, Richard Swinton wants to take Thornton Huxley away.
When did this happen? Why are you only reporting it to me now? Kevin raised his voice in frustration.
I heard that you'd been attacked, so Spencer brought his men directly here.
Dylan Hill told him helplessly.
But he did a good job. He recorded Virgil Huxley admitting that he'd colluded with the Zucker family. He really wanted to murder you. Now the officials down in St. Louis have finally calmed down a little.
Who asked him to do that? That was foolish, Kevin said angrily. Everyone knew that the major powers didn't pay attention to St. Louis, but this would definitely change their minds. Kevin could totally predict that many people among the major powers would turn their attention to St. Louis now. In the past, they would have been able to obtain their final victory through business and finance channels, but now Spencer had turned the whole situation into a mess. The wind was about to blow in the opposite direction. Tell Spencer to leave St. Louis and bring his men here. They are to return to the Radiance immediately. Then you need to sit back and watch the situation carefully. Also, you have to pay close attention to the changes down in St. Louis. Don't let any clue slip by you, no matter how small. Don't do anything else without clearing it directly with me. After Kevin barked these orders, he abruptly hung up the phone. However, before he could catch his breath, his phone rang again. This time it was Scott Whitney from the Reaper Squad. Scott Whitney? Kevin said as he quickly picked up the call. Whitney skipped the small talk and listed Kevin's problems one after the other.
Kid, you have to leave Chicago immediately. The Radiance has gone too far this time. The Herbalist Society sent people to the south seeking revenge, but they've also resorted to other means through more conventional channels. You're surrounded by enemies.
This was depressing news for Kevin. He didn't think that the Herbalist Society would have done something like this.
Also, you need to inform the Radiance that they have to reclaim the Midwest branch of the Herbalist Society. I don't know who made that decision, but it's obvious that they're stupid. The Radiants can't afford to get involved in this mess. I have no choice but to tell them about the whereabouts of the Reaper Squad. Since you're the second highest ranking official, I may be able to save your life."
Whitney seemed to be in a hurry. After he was done speaking, he ended the call without even saying goodbye. Kevin looked out the window at the horizon. He could feel ominous clouds pressing down on the entire city. And he could clearly feel that an invisible hand was reaching out toward Chicago. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. Officer Emmett quickly walked into the room with a few police officers.
"Kevin Williams, you're under arrest for committing murder at the Salix Leaf Hotel. Please come with us,"
one of the officers announced in a very official tone of voice. Officer Emmett, who was standing in the back of the group, stared at Kevin with mixed feelings. It wasn't difficult to see the struggle going on inside her at that moment, considerable guilt, but also some excitement.
"Are you guys for real? President Williams is the CEO of the Williams Company. How could he hurt someone?"
Mitchell Cook quickly said.
"Let me call your superior right now and ask what's going on."
"Mitchell Cook, I advise you to not waste your time. The cameras at the Salix Leaf Hotel captured everything that happened that night," the police officer said confidently. "We have enough evidence to arrest Kevin Williams."
Mitchell Cook began to protest. "Mitch, it's okay." Kevin put a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Don't be impulsive. Take care of Adriana Wright and the others. I'll go with these officers. I won't resist." After saying that, Kevin sauntered out of the room. He didn't even look at Officer Emmett as he brushed past her. Although the two of them used to have a close relationship, that was all in the past. Officer Emmett's recent actions had really disappointed him. In a quiet mansion in St. Louis, Richard Swinton was sitting on the sofa with a disappointed look on his face. One of the family's household staff poured him a fresh cup of coffee. This was Frida Zucker's family residence, and it was also a place that Richard Swinton had often visited many years before. Richard heard a charming and elegant voice from across the room. "The last time you came here was 8 years ago. I thought you'd never take the initiative to come see me again in this lifetime." Richard Swinton's heart skipped a beat, and a hint of pain appeared in his eyes. Frida Zucker, who was wearing a blood-red jacket, walked over to a chair across from Richard and sat down in a somewhat flirtatious manner. As she crossed her legs, she was giving off a very positive vibe. "Richard, just get to the point. What do you want from me?" Frida's voice was stern, but the expression in her eyes betrayed her true feelings. After a long pause, Richard finally came back to his senses. He took a deep breath and looked at the woman in front of him who used to mean so much in his life.
"Why did I come to see you today? You should know very well why I'm here."
Richard hesitated for a moment and continued.
"You shouldn't have cooperated with the Huxley family."
"Cooperate? Are you joking with me? Everyone in St. Louis already knows about this. The ones who collaborated with the Huxley family are the Zucker family. That has absolutely nothing to do with me." A trace of panic flashed across Frida's face as she defended herself. Although she hadn't left her house in the last few days, she clearly knew what had been going on in St. Louis.
"You may be able to deceive others, but you can't deceive me."
Richard stared at her seriously and said with a solemn expression,
"With Sean Zucker's cowardly character, he wouldn't dare to make a move against the Radiants."
The Zucker family had a bit of influence in St. Louis, but Richard understood the situation completely. The current head of the Zucker family, Sean Zucker, was a coward who never accomplished anything. Whenever there was a challenge, he would only back away from it. If he had bothered to develop himself over the years, the Zucker family wouldn't have lost so much of its power and even lost its rank among the great families of the city. If the Zucker family's previous head hadn't worked so hard to earn the fortune that his descendants foolishly squandered, the Zucker family would have disappeared a long time ago. When Richard mentioned Sean, Frida's eyes clearly reflected the hostility that she felt towards him. The smile on her face quickly disappeared. "If you're just here to denounce me, you can leave now." Then Frida declared, "But I am going to take Kevin's life. The Swinton family is already powerful enough and a lot of people don't want you to grow any stronger."
Frida, don't be silly. The Radiance is standing behind Kevin. You can't defeat him with your current level of strength,
Richard replied anxiously. "Then I'd like to ask you something. What if you had to make a choice between me and Kevin one day?" Frida suddenly felt nervous. She looked him right in the eyes and asked, "You? Who would you choose to live or die?" This question seemed to hurt Richard's feelings.
Why would you ask me something like that? Richard retorted, answering her question with a question.
"Do I still have a place in your heart?" Frida asked him bluntly. For a moment, the atmosphere in the living room became very tense. Thousands of emotions rose up in their hearts, but neither of them could find a way to break the silence. After a long time, Richard let out a long breath and looked deeply into Frida's eyes. Then he turned around and walked towards the door.
Frida, I know that you used to love me deeply. Until now, I couldn't let you out of my heart. But Kevin is my adopted son, and I can't bear to see him get hurt.
Then he finally answered her question.
If I ever had to choose between you and Kevin, I think I would choose to die myself and let the two of you live.
After Richard finished speaking, he didn't look back and just continued out the door. Frida finally couldn't hold it in anymore. She collapsed on the sofa and started crying. With tears streaming down her face, she lamented, "Richard, do you know why I never married?" Then she sobbed. "I also love you deeply, but Kevin is not someone you can protect. The person who wants to take his life is too powerful. If that day ever comes, I'll choose to die without any hesitation. I only hope that I can die in your arms." Naturally, nobody was there to hear Frida Zucker's sad words. They disappeared into thin air. When Richard Swinton left Frida Zucker's home after asking her if she'd been behind the attack on Kevin, she began to cry. With no one there to hear her, she admitted how much she loved him and how much she wished she could die in Richard's arms. After just a few hours, all the most powerful people in St. Louis had their eyes focused on the Radiants, especially those who had a deep relationship with the Huxley family, or even those people who had gotten their start with the help of the Huxleys. If even the mighty Huxley family could be destroyed, what if the Radiants wanted to attack one of them? Defeating the rest of the most powerful families in St. Louis would be a piece of cake. Fortunately, after a large number of men from the Radiants were mobilized, Spencer and the others left St. Louis at lightning speed and didn't disturb anyone. This outcome made everyone heave a sigh of relief, but at the same time they were very sure of one thing. The Radiants obviously had the power to kill them all, but they hadn't done it. The destruction of the Huxley family was really a warning to everyone in St. Louis. In the Swinton family's mansion, Thornton Huxley was lying on a bed, still in a coma. There was a shocking slap mark still on his face. "Thornton Huxley looks so pitiful. Uncle Virgil has been killed and the rest of the Huxley family was also destroyed by the Radiants. What should Thornton do now?" Gail Swinton, who was wearing a light purple dress, was sitting on a stool and looking at Thornton. Her face was full of worry and heartache. "Sis, do you think Thornton will ever wake up?" Brenda Swinton only shook her head silently when she heard that. She didn't know how to explain it to her little sister. "Well, then next time I see Kevin, that country bumpkin, I'll definitely help Thornton to vent his anger. I also want Dad to chase the Radiants out of St. Louis." Gail waved her little fist and shouted excitedly, "Gail, you can't talk like that." Brenda lightly patted her younger sister's shoulder and looked at her seriously. "There are some things that we can't interfere in. Some people won't listen to you because you're so young. They won't take what you say seriously. And don't forget what happened to Curtis Green." Gail pouted when her sister mentioned this. It was because of Curtis Green that she hadn't been able to leave the house for an entire year. "Dad is biased. You and I are his daughters, but he only has Kevin in his heart, Gail said very discontentedly. I swear if I get the opportunity, I'll make Kevin pay the price for what he's done. Brenda sighed weakly. She really wanted to tell her sister how dangerous her idea was, but after thinking about the current situation, she decided to just forget about it. However, an image of Kevin gradually appeared in her mind. He was still that simple and honest young man she'd met in Penny Sutherland's mansion. That seemed like it was so long ago, and now Kevin had reached a position that most people could only dream of. Brenda had often thought about something. Maybe it wasn't so unrealistic for her father to make her get married. Perhaps that was what she wanted, deep in her heart. In a police station in Chicago, Kevin was sitting on a cold chair while a police officer stood in front of him and interrogated him. Officer Emmett didn't say a word from the beginning to the end of the questioning. She just stared at Kevin in a daze. As for what she was thinking in her heart, there was no way to know.
Kevin, you better tell me honestly. Why did you commit that murder in the Salix Leaf Hotel? Do you know what the consequences will be for that? We have sufficient evidence of your crimes in our hands right now. It's best that you tell us everything in detail. Otherwise, what awaits you will only be a speedy trial.
The police officer spoke to Kevin very harshly. In fact, he was actually the precinct captain and his name was Arthur Pearson. However, Kevin had never opened his mouth ever since he entered the room. He answered the officer's question with just a shake of his head.
Kevin, you'd better straighten out your attitude. This is the police station and you're currently our prime suspect, not the CEO of the Williams Company. Put your arrogant attitude aside for now.
Captain Pearson was starting to get angry. He'd been in his position for almost 5 years and he'd seen a lot of criminals, but he'd never seen anybody like Kevin. He was as calm as could be and gave people the feeling that he was just sitting by a river with a fishing pole. After almost an hour, Captain Pearson took out a document and placed it in front of Kevin.
Sign it,
he insisted. Glancing at the contents of the document, a smile appeared on Kevin's lips. What kind of instructions did Commissioner Campbell give you? I haven't said anything yet, but you're so impatient to convict me.
Do I need you to say anything? The surveillance cameras in the Salix Leaf Hotel captured everything clearly. A murderous gang caused the deaths of more than 90 people and more than 10 others were seriously injured. This was a vicious, unforgivable crime.
Then Captain Pearson smiled menacingly and sneered.
The evidence is conclusive. You won't be able to get out of this. Nobody will be able to come and save you.
Hearing this, a trace of panic flashed across Officer Emmett's eyes. She quickly stood up from her chair and declared, Captain Pearson, this matter hasn't been thoroughly investigated. You cannot draw such a wild conclusion. What if Kevin has really been wrongly accused?
Officer Emmett, I know what I'm doing. Kevin is a criminal who committed murder and you're supposed to be an impartial police officer. We absolutely cannot tolerate people like this. Do you understand?
Captain Pearson was obviously unhappy with Officer Emmett's protest. Well said, Captain. Kevin gave him a slow clap, but he still didn't look over at Officer Emmett. Except, before you convict me, you better check with your superior. See what he has to say about this.
Kevin, I know that the Williams Company has a lot of clout in this town, but the court system isn't a place where a businessman like you has any influence. Nobody's above the law, do you understand?
Captain Pearson banged his fist on the table hard.
Sign the document immediately. Do you get the picture?
Just then, the door of the interrogation room suddenly opened and Terrence Price walked in. He spoke very calmly and assuredly. Captain Pearson, I've been told that you're in charge here.
Mr. Price!
Officer Emmett and Captain Pearson hurried over and greeted him politely.
What are you doing here, sir?
Captain Pearson asked sheepishly. Captain Pearson had been ordered by Commissioner Campbell to keep Kevin in the precinct lockup. Of course, he would never disobey a direct order from the commissioner. With all due respect for your rank, Captain Pearson, this is out of your jurisdiction. Kevin has a high-ranking position in the federal government. He belongs to a special government special ops team, and he's the second in command of the Reaper Squad. He has the authority to kill first and report later." Terrence Price looked at him and remarked, "Captain Pearson even dared to interrogate Mr. Williams? Do you know he's the highest-ranked federal employee in Chicago?" As soon as he finished speaking, Captain Pearson immediately stood at attention. Beads of sweat started to form on his forehead. The only federal employees with a higher rank than Kevin were in Washington, D.C. After receiving Commissioner Campbell's order, the captain specially investigated Kevin's background. He knew that Kevin had been kicked out by the Williams family and didn't have any special career or military training. There's no way he was second in command of the Reaper Squad.
"Please forgive me, sir. I really didn't know anything about this. Furthermore, the Salix leap."
Terrence Price quickly interrupted Officer Pearson. "Mr. Williams didn't do anything in the Salix Leaf Hotel. Even if you want to investigate the issue, it has nothing to do with him." Then he looked the captain in the eyes and said, "You should know very well who Dominic Archer is. Even if Mr. Williams really wants to take action against him, it's considered a confidential operation. It's not something that you can interfere in. Do you understand?"
"I understand," Captain Pearson replied in frustration.
"Release him immediately." Terrence Price looked over at Kevin, then added, "Captain Pearson, you're a smart man, but unfortunately, you've made a serious mistake. There are some things that you can't get involved in. If you value your life, you should stay out of this." Captain Pearson began to shiver when he heard Terrence Price's threat. When Officer Emmett, who was standing off to the side, found out that Kevin was going to be okay, she broke into a smile. "Mr. Williams, I'm sorry. Because of my late arrival, you were forced to deal with this humiliating experience." Terrence apologized sincerely and offered him a warm handshake. Kevin smiled and nodded back. Why hadn't he been worried throughout the whole ordeal? The reason was simple. When he left the hospital, he sent a message to Scott Whitney. As long as he was a member of the Reaper Squad, he might as well take advantage of his position, right? It felt good for Kevin to use his position of authority to teach some people a lesson. While Kevin was being interrogated at the police station, Captain Pearson tried to get him to sign a confession for committing murders at the Salix Leaf Hotel. Kevin was sure that Commissioner Campbell was behind the setup. Officer Emmett was there and finally objected to the captain's treatment of Kevin. Just when the situation looked hopeless, Terrence Price showed up to explain that Kevin was a highly ranked member of the federal government attached to the Reaper Squad. They had to release Kevin from custody and drop their charges. Kevin didn't say anything. He just showed Terrence his hands, which were still handcuffed. Terrence Price immediately understood what Kevin meant. He walked up to Kevin to help him remove the restraints. In fact, he was full of respect for Kevin's rank. However, any government official with his seniority would be respected no matter where they went. It wasn't easy to get an official rank, and it was even more difficult to climb up the chain of command. Terrence Price had been a civil court judge for many years. He'd always been conscientious, but he'd never had a chance to get promoted. How old was Kevin now? He'd already become second in command of the Reaper Squad. Apart from his outstanding contributions to the federal government, the most important thing was that he had a strong background. Just as Terrence Price was about to touch the handcuffs, Kevin suddenly pulled back his hands. "There are some things that you shouldn't touch. Find whoever put these on me and ask him to remove them for me himself," Kevin said with a smile. Terrence Price was stunned for a moment. Then he immediately came back to his senses and pulled Captain Pearson by the arm. "What are you still standing there for? Hurry up and help Mr. Williams out of his cuffs."
Yes, sir."
Captain Pearson hurriedly wiped the sweat from his forehead and took out the key to unlock Kevin's handcuffs. "I'll call the person behind all this later. I don't like to be a pain in the butt, but I'm also not a pushover who can be kicked around by a minor official," Kevin announced to Captain Pearson and the others as he rubbed his wrists. "And I'll remember what happened here today. One of these days, I'll definitely return the favor." Kevin patted Captain Pearson on the shoulder and left the interrogation room with Terrence Price. Officer Emmett quietly followed him as he left. Only Captain Pearson was left standing in the middle of the room, gasping for breath. His uniform was soaked with sweat. After finally coming back to his senses, he quickly took out his phone and called Commissioner Campbell. Kevin exchanged a few words with Terrence Price and then strolled out the main doors of the police station. He noticed that Officer Emmett was still walking behind him. "Why are you following me?" Kevin asked her with an unpleasant look on his face. "Kevin, I have something to tell you." Officer Emmett looked down at the ground and shuffled her feet uncomfortably. "What is there to talk about between us? The Blair family matter is certainly related to this mess, but I had nothing to do with it," Kevin said with a touch of pity in his voice. "I don't care about Sherwin Blair's problems." Officer Emmett wanted to say something else but stopped herself. She started to open her mouth but didn't know exactly what to say. "Are you free tonight? Can we find a place to talk?" To be honest, Kevin wanted to reject her immediately, but he couldn't get himself to say it. "We'll talk about that some other time." Kevin was beginning to feel uncomfortable. He turned around and left the government office quickly. He still had to rush back to the hospital because he didn't know if Lily had woken up yet. On the other side of town, Terrence Price had just returned to his office and was staring at the information he'd found out about Kevin on his computer screen. Suddenly, his phone rang. Although there was no name on the caller ID, Terrence knew very well who would be calling him at this time.
"Mr. Price, don't you think you owe me an explanation?"
The moment the call connected, Commissioner Campbell's deep voice boomed out of the phone as if he was trying his best to control his fury. "Commissioner Campbell, what kind of explanation do you want?" Terrence Price wasn't a fool. He knew very well that this was a time for them to stand on the same side. If he played his cards right, it could lead to a meteoric rise in wealth and glory. On the other hand, if he made the wrong step, there would be nothing left of him. He could disappear without a trace.
"Why did you let Kevin leave?"
Commissioner Campbell asked him gruffly. "Commissioner, before you come here to condemn us, you better investigate who Kevin really is first," Terrence Price replied bluntly. Since he'd gotten Kevin out of custody, it was clear where he stood on the matter. "Kevin is second in command of an elite team. His rank is higher than either yours or mine. I advise you to not cause too much trouble because of a minor disagreement you have with him. If you go too far, it won't be easy for anyone to help you out of it." After Terrence finished speaking, Commissioner Campbell remained silent. He didn't hear a peep from the other end of the line. It was obvious that what Terrence had said had unnerved the commissioner, which was something he hadn't expected. In the Archer family mansion, Dominic was sitting on the living room sofa looking very pale. Opposite him sat a man in his 20s, and there was nobody else with them in the enormous room. Dominic kept looking at the person who just arrived. He could clearly feel that the young man's aura was as deep as an abyss, and it gave him an unusual sense of impending doom.
"May I know your name? Could you please explain the reason for your visit?"
Dominic Archer was very cautious, but he still had a lot of money, and he could afford to be very generous. "It doesn't matter who I am, but I've come to visit you to ease your worries and troubles," the man said sharply. His voice was very raspy, full of loneliness and desolation.
"What difficulties do you think I have?"
Dominic Archer asked with a puzzled look in his eyes.
"For example, who injured you? Your strength seems to be decreasing quite a lot,"
the man said with a smile. He was totally unaware of the powerful vibe that Dominic Archer was putting out.
"Who the hell are you?"
Dominic looked very unhappy with what the man was saying.
"Why should I believe you?" "It doesn't matter whether you believe me or not. The important thing is that I have the ability to help you. More importantly, after I help you, you'll owe me a favor in return," the man explained cryptically. When he heard this, Dominic didn't say anything else. He just sat there deep in thought. As for what he was thinking about, no one could guess. "It looks like you don't believe what I'm saying."
The man calmly took out his phone and typed a text message.
"But I don't mind showing you some sincerity."
The moment he finished speaking, Dominic Archer's phone suddenly vibrated. The contents of the two text messages made his eyes widen in shock. The first message showed that Adriana Wright, Emos Square, Gilbert Rhodes, and the others had been attacked. They were currently in the hospital and no one knew whether they were going to live or die. The following day, Kevin had been brought to the police station. The outcome of his arrest had not yet been made public.
"Do you believe me now?" the man smiled and asked. "Is this enough proof for you?
Dominic Archer was so shocked that he couldn't say anything in response. As one of the foremost underground leaders in Chicago, he naturally knew how powerful Emo Squire and the other two people were. It wasn't a coincidence that they were attacked at the same time.
"I said I can help you solve your problem."
The man leaned back on the sofa and put his hands together behind his head. He sat there with a diabolical smile, waiting for Dominic to reply.
"What do you need me to do?"
Dominic obviously understood what the man was doing. He knew there was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. The other guy must have come for a purpose.
"Let me introduce myself. My name is Jake Morris. I've come here from the South to take Kevin's life."
It was clear to Dominic that Jake Morris meant business and intended to follow through on his plan.
"The Morris family?"
Dominic's voice was several times louder than before as he replied in shock. Chicago was just a small city compared to the vastness of the rest of the country. No matter how successful Dominic Archer was, he could only be considered a big fish in a small pond. However, no matter how relatively small the city was, Dominic Archer still had a lot of connections across the country. He'd also heard of some large organizations such as the Herbalist Society and the 10 major schools. The Morris family, which had always been legendary in the Midwest, was the one that made such a strong impression on him.
"It seems that you've heard about my family," Jake Morris smiled as he straightened his tie. "Since that's the case, I don't need to waste my time giving you my resume. I wonder what you'd like me to do, Mr. Morris."
Dominic Archer's attitude instantly became far more respectful than earlier. There was no way that he could reach the same level as the Morris family. They were so far out of his league. So if he couldn't fight them, he might as well join them. Perhaps he could use this opportunity to move up in the world.
"You have half a day to find out everything you can related to Kevin Williams. Also, don't tell anyone about my existence or my visit. If you do, there will be very grave consequences."
When Jake Morris mentioned Kevin, you could see the indescribable hatred in his eyes. Dominic Archer's visitor turned out to be Jake Morris. He revealed that he'd come from St. Louis to find and kill Kevin, and he wanted Dominic's help. Dominic saw this as a chance to move up in the world, so he was willing to join forces with Jake. But Jake warned him that he couldn't tell anyone about his plan, or even that he existed.
"Understood, sir."
Dominic Archer nodded very excitedly. Dominic hadn't run into this kind of situation in many years, but the Morris family was still a formidable opponent, no matter who they were facing. The Morris family was like a huge weight on their chest that was crushing them to the point where they couldn't breathe or even offer any resistance. Even the families over in Washington, D.C. had to follow his orders. It was even worse for Dominic Archer, who was just a minor player from Chicago. Lily hadn't woken up yet from her operation after being hit by a car. Kevin thought carefully about it and decided that she needed someone to take care of her, especially since he still had a lot of obligations, and he obviously couldn't leave her alone while she continued her recovery. So he made a call to Phoebe Anderson and asked her to come over to stay with Lily. Then he went to visit Gilbert Rhodes and the others in the intensive care unit. Emo Squire was the first to wake up, but he hadn't said anything to Mitchell Cook yet. He just stared up at the ceiling expressionlessly, and it was impossible to tell what he was thinking about. Shouldn't he be happy after surviving a disaster like that? Why is he so lifeless? Kevin pulled over a chair and sat down next to Emo's hospital bed.
"Mr. Williams, I really didn't expect this,"
Emo Squire said to him so quietly that Kevin had to lean in to hear him.
"It was the person I trusted the most in the entire company."
When they heard this, Kevin and Mitchell looked at each other at the same time. They had already guessed it was an inside job, but now they had their confirmation. It definitely wasn't easy to be betrayed by your confidants. It's too bad that the situation came to this. Don't worry about it. Kevin patted the back of Emo's hand to comfort him.
Mr. Williams, I feel that this matter isn't that simple. If I'd been attacked alone, I could only blame myself for turning a blind eye. But since Gilbert Rhodes and President Wright were also attacked, it proves that there must be someone behind all this.
Emo Squire's eyes were filled with murderous intent as he spoke to Kevin.
To be able to take control of all our trusted aides without anyone knowing about it, our enemy must have a lot of money and influence. Mr. Williams, you have to be careful.
Kevin nodded his head in agreement as soon as Emo Squire finished speaking. What Emo thought had happened was exactly the same thing that Kevin had expected. However, he didn't have any solid evidence to prove who was behind the attack. How are the others doing right now? Kevin calmed himself down and tried to get more information. If he was going to find an answer, the three of them had to be able to provide him with as many clues as possible. Even though it was just the beginning of the investigation, Kevin had to get to the bottom of things as soon as he could. By now, Kevin had gotten rid of all the hidden dangers in Chicago, so the force behind this was still a mystery.
They're being held outside of town. Should we go over right now or wait a while?
Mitchell Cook asked him knowingly. There's no need to trouble our friends here any longer. They need their rest. Kevin got up and walked out of the room with Mitchell. Then the two of them left the hospital. Half an hour later, they arrived at a logistics warehouse in the northern suburbs of Chicago. This place was the Whitzler Hotel used for material storage. It was also the place that Drake Cook used to solve some problems that couldn't be handled in the public eye. There was a dim light illuminating the area in the basement where a man and two women were curled up on the ground with their hands and feet bound. The three of them had been selected by Emo Squire for previous missions. In the bodyguard field, they were considered to be top-notch experts. So after they were caught, they didn't seem very upset at all. In fact, they remained pretty calm. Kevin's gaze swept across the three of them one by one. I don't like to waste time, and I also don't like to waste my breath on my enemies. Just tell me who ordered you to do it and we can be done with this. I can guarantee that you'll be able to leave as soon as possible, Kevin added sternly. His voice was calm, but his words were filled with fury. Adriana Wright and the others had a close relationship with Kevin. How could he have let them be attacked right under his nose? And it was very likely that the person behind the assault was coming for him next. How could Kevin not be angry at this? The man in the group, whose name was Alvin Preston, spoke first and admitted,
We were paid to do it. It was nothing personal, just business. From the moment we made our decision to take the job, I had a suspicion that something like this would happen.
One of the other two attackers, a woman named Megan Kinzer, didn't even blink an eye.
You're not going to get any information out of us, she said flatly.
Mr. Squire has already trained us very well. Mitchell Cook should know about that. The last of the culprits, Alyssa Roach, said confidently. I know who you are. You're the CEO of the Williams Company and the leader behind President Wright and the others. When he heard her say this, Mitchell Cook's eyes were filled with murderous intent. However, he also knew that what Alyssa said was correct. Emo Squire's method of training his employees was comparable to what was used by elite teams in the military. It wasn't going to be easy to get any information from them. A cruel smile appeared on Kevin's lips. In spite of what you said, I'd still like to give it a try. You've injured some people who are very dear to me. In the next second, he reached out his right hand and squeezed one of Alvin Preston's ribs. As he pulled, you could hear a cracking sound. The intense pain made Preston gasp for breath. However, he gritted his teeth and didn't make another sound. Solid bones. Kevin gave him an approving look. That's okay. I like a challenge. After saying that, Kevin kicked him in the knee, shattering it instantly. Preston's face immediately turned pale and his eyes looked like they were going to pop out. He began to sweat. The show's just begun, but don't close your eyes or you might miss it, Kevin said mockingly. Alyssa Roach and Megan Kinzer looked at Kevin in a daze. They'd all been interrogated before, but none of them had ever experienced anything like this. In fact, in their profession, they'd faced death many times before. Suddenly, Alvin Preston let out a loud scream. Kevin had bent one of the man's fingers back and dislocated it. The intense pain caused his entire face to contort, and his teeth began to chatter. "I have all the time in the world. We can stay here all night," Kevin sneered as he stared coldly into the man's eyes.
"You're not going to get anything out of me, even if you have to kill me,"
Preston retorted in a trembling voice as he tried to control the pain. "Why are you in such a hurry to die?" Kevin asked him bluntly. "I told you that the show's just begun. You still have 9 fingers and 10 toes left." Even Mitchell Cook couldn't help but be shocked when he heard Kevin say this. Kevin's interrogation method was utterly devastating. No one would have thought that someone who looked so kind and gentle could be so ruthless. But these people had asked for it when they tried to kill his friends. Still not saying anything? Kevin reached for Preston's hand again. The man almost fainted from the pain as Kevin twisted another one of his fingers. "If you faint, I have countless ways to wake you up," Kevin said lightly as if he was doing something casual.
"I really don't know anything. All I can tell you is that someone contacted me and gave me $3 million for the job."
Preston took a deep breath and continued.
"The person also said that he didn't need me to take Mr. Squire's life, just put him in the hospital. I really don't know anything else."
He wasn't afraid of death, but that didn't mean that he could endure any more of the pain. "When did the person contact you? Did he give you cash or a bank card?" Kevin asked him angrily.
"It was 5 days ago. I didn't touch a single cent of the $3 million in cash."
Alvin Preston's face was getting paler and paler, and he was starting to look extremely weak. Kevin looked into Preston's eyes and growled, "You'll have a hard time spending it in a coffin." They were all afraid of what Kevin was going to do next.